The fog came first. It rolled in from the sea, thick and gray, swallowing the coastline as if the land itself was trying to vanish. For the men standing on the decks of those Roman ships, it must have felt like sailing toward a wall. They had seen many shores before: Gaul, Hispania, the sun-scorched edges of Africa. But this place was different. Even before they set foot on it, the air tasted strange, colder, sharper. The wind carried a smell of wet stone and ancient earth. Untouched by the roads, the walls, the order they had spent their lives building, these were not explorers. They were soldiers of the 20th Legion, veterans of campaigns that had crushed tribes across 3 continents. They had seen entire nations kneel, but none of them had ever seen a land like this. The ships cut through the gray water in silence. Somewhere beyond that wall of mist, a drumbeat began, low and uneven. Not a military rhythm, something older. Something that did not follow the rules of war they understood. They looked at each other. No one spoke, and the fog kept closing in. The official order was simple: advance north, secure the territory, bring the wild edge of Britannia under Roman law. But orders written in the warmth of a command tent do not capture what it feels like to walk into a forest where the light barely reaches the ground. They do not capture the sound of boots sinking into mud that has never known a paved road. They do not capture the moment a soldier realizes that every hill, every tree, every shadow could be watching him back. The land they entered was called Caledonia. It was not a kingdom. It was not a province. It was a place that had never been named by anyone who wrote things down. To the Romans, it was a blank space. To the people who lived there, it was home. That moment of contrast, a land without a written name yet deeply known, is the kind of discovery this channel exists to find. If you want to keep walking into moments where 2 worlds meet and one of them vanishes into the mist, subscribe. That threshold is where we live. And I want to ask, what name would you give a land that has never been mapped? Drop it in the comments. The first sign that something was wrong came from the scouts. They returned pale, not from fear, but from something harder to name. They had found no villages, no farms, no roads, no signs of settlement as Rome understood them. What they found were footprints. Footprints that led into swamps where no Roman would dare to walk. Footprints that appeared in places the scouts had passed just hours before. Footprints that seemed to circle back, as if whoever left them had been following the column for days, always staying hidden, always watching. The centurion dismissed it as superstition. Natives, hunters, nothing to fear. But that night, around the campfires, the men whispered differently. They had come to conquer a people. They had not expected to be watched by ghosts. This was the world of the Picts, not a single tribe, a network of peoples who shared something deeper than allegiance. They belonged to this land in a way the Romans simply could not understand. Their bodies were painted with patterns made from woad, a plant that stained the skin blue, not for decoration, for transformation. In battle, they did not look like men wearing paint. They looked like something else entirely. Figures carved from the mist itself. They did not build cities. They did not write treaties. They did not measure their worth in coin or stone. Their wealth was cattle. Their monuments were the hills, and their history was sung, not recorded. When they fought, they did not form lines. They appeared and disappeared like the weather. They knew every bog, every ravine, every pass that would swallow a heavy legionary in armor. They had no interest in meeting Rome on Rome's terms, and they had no intention of losing. For weeks, the Roman column pushed deeper into Caledonia. Each day, the land grew more hostile. The forests thickened, the marshes deepened, the rations ran lower. The centurions began to notice something unsettling. The locals were burning the crops ahead of them, small fires that turned fields to ash before the Romans could harvest a single ear of grain. It was a strategy older than Rome itself, scorched earth. But it worked. Hunger crept into the legion, then cold. Then the silence of men who had stopped believing in victory and had started believing only in survival. And still, the painted figures appeared at the edges of the camp at dawn, never close enough to fight, always close enough to be seen, waiting. Then came the battle that was not a battle. The Romans had finally cornered a group of Pictish warriors in a narrow valley. It was perfect ground for a disciplined formation. The centurion gave the order to advance, shields up, pylons ready. the measured step that had broken every enemy from the Rhine to the Nile. But when they reached the center of the valley, there was no one there, only silence. And then the screams came from behind them. The Picts had not fled. They had circled around through the bogs, through paths no Roman could follow, and struck the rear of the column with a ferocity that defied everything the legionaries had been trained for. No formation, no signals, no front line, just sudden violence from every direction at once, followed by a retreat so fast that the dead seemed to vanish into the earth. When it was over, the Romans had lost dozens of men. They had killed almost no one in return, and worse, they had never even seen the faces of the men who attacked them. It was the slow realization that some lands cannot be owned, that some people would rather burn everything they have than live under a foreign flag, that there are limits to power, and those limits are not drawn in sand or stone, but in the human will to remain free. The Emperor Hadrian would eventually order a wall built across the width of Britain, not a line of conquest, a line of admission. Here, the wall said, we go no further. It was the most honest thing Rome ever built. That honesty is what keeps us chasing these stories. The raw moment when an empire admits its own limit. If you want to stay with us as we follow the full arc of that admission, subscribe. This channel lives at the edge of the map, and I want to hear from you. Write here in the comments if you feel the weight of that wall. For the Picts, the wall was not a defeat. It was a confirmation. They had faced the greatest military machine the world had ever seen. And the machine had stopped, not because it chose to, because it could not continue. The painted warriors returned to their hills, their songs, their ancient rhythm of life. The Romans built their wall and called it peace. But everyone who stood on either side of that stone knew the truth. Rome had met a people it could not conquer, and that changes something in the soul of an empire. Once you discover that your power has a limit, you begin to wonder what else lies beyond your reach. The wall was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a question that Rome would never answer. That wall stretched for 73 Roman miles, from the mouth of the Tyne to the shores of the Solway Firth. It stood 12 feet high in places, a spine of stone and turf cut across the narrowest neck of the island. Forts, mile castles, and watchtowers studded its length like buttons on a tunic. It was an engineering marvel, a statement of permanence carved into the landscape, and it was a monument to failure, because walls do not get built when one side is winning. Walls get built when one side has realized it can win no further. Every stone in that barrier was a confession. Every garrison stationed along it was a reminder that the empire had met its match in the painted men of the north. Generation after generation, the sentries on the wall would scan the horizon for movement. Sometimes they saw nothing for weeks. Sometimes they saw smoke rising from hills the Romans had never climbed. And sometimes, on the darkest mornings, they saw figures standing on the ridgelines, watching back. The wall did not stop those figures from coming. It only made them choose their moments more carefully. It was in the decades after the wall that the true nature of this conflict revealed itself. Rome did not abandon the north entirely. There were campaigns, punitive expeditions, attempts to push the frontier forward again. Emperor Antoninus Pius built his own wall further north, a turf rampart across the Forth, Clyde Isthmus, as if the stone of Hadrian had not been lesson enough. But the Picts had learned something too. They had learned that Rome could be bled, not in a single great battle. The Picts never won a pitched battle against the legions in the way that Hannibal or the Parthians had. They won in smaller ways, in the disappearance of a patrol, in the silent night when 3 sentries were found with their throats open and no one had heard a sound, in the slow erosion of morale that turned veteran soldiers into men who stared at the tree line and saw ghosts. The Antonine Wall was abandoned within 20 years. The turf crumbled. The legions pulled back to stone, and the Picts did not celebrate. They simply returned to the land that had always been theirs. There is a moment in every empire's life when it stops asking, "What can we take?" and starts asking, "What can we hold?" For Rome and Britannia, that moment came in the 2nd century. The cost of holding the north was not measured in gold alone. It was measured in the lives of soldiers who never returned, in the sanity of those who did, in the slow corruption of the imperial idea itself. Rome had always told itself that its power was a gift to the world. That civilization followed its eagles. That resistance was ignorance, and ignorance would eventually yield. But the Picts never yielded. They did not write philosophy. They did not build aqueducts. They did not produce any record of their own history that survived in ink on parchment. They left almost nothing behind that a Roman scholar would have recognized as civilization. And yet, they won. The psychological weight of that victory is difficult to overstate. Consider what it meant for a legionary standing on Hadrian's wall in the middle of the 3rd century. He had been told his entire life that Rome was eternal, that its dominion was destined, that the gods themselves had blessed the empire with the right to rule. He had seen the monuments, the roads, the cities that stretched from the Euphrates to the Atlantic, and yet, beyond that wall, there was a people who had never accepted any of it, a people who had not been conquered, not assimilated, not even converted to the Roman way of life after more than 100 years of contact. That soldier knew, in the quiet hours of his watch, that something was wrong with the story he had been told. The wall was not just a fortification, it was a crack in the imperial imagination. The raids continued through the 3rd century and into the 4th. Pictish war parties crossed the wall at will, striking farms and villages, disappearing before the garrisons could respond. The Romans responded with more forts, more patrols, more desperate attempts to seal a frontier that had never been sealed. But the Picts knew the land too well. They moved along ridges invisible from the valleys. They crossed rivers at fords the Romans had never mapped. They appeared out of the mist and vanished back into it, leaving behind only ash and silence. Roman writers of the time described them as savages, barbarians, creatures barely human. But the desperation in those descriptions betrays the truth. The Romans were not describing a people they looked down on. They were describing a people they feared. The historian Dio Cassius wrote that the Caledonians possess a spirit of independence and a refusal to submit that neither the passage of time nor the approach of a superior force can break. He did not say that with contempt. He said it with something closer to awe. We are nearing the end of this journey, but that awe deserves to linger. If you want to keep encountering moments where the expected narrative cracks open, subscribe. This channel is built on exactly that. And before you go, drop the word endurance in the comments if you believe that outlasting can be a form of victory. By the late 4th century, the empire was fraying at every seam. The frontier in Britannia was no longer the only strain on Roman resources. There were Goths on the Danube, Persians on the Euphrates, usurpers rising in every province. The legions that had once held the wall were pulled away, one cohort at a time, to fight wars that felt closer to the heart of the empire. And the Picts, who had been watching for 3 centuries, saw their moment. They came in greater numbers than before, not as raiders this time, but as something more deliberate. They crossed the wall not in search of plunder alone, but in search of land. The old patterns broke. The painted warriors pushed south, past the forts, past the abandoned mile castles, into the fertile valleys that Rome had once called its own. The retreat that followed was not a single event. It was a slow unraveling. Town after town slipped from Roman control. The roads fell into disrepair. The garrisons starved or deserted. The wall, that great monument to imperial ambition, became a relic before it was even abandoned. By the early 5th century, the Roman presence in Britannia was effectively over, and the Picts did not chase the departing legions. They did not need to. They had simply outlasted the empire that had tried to erase them. What the Picts understood, and what Rome never fully grasped, was that endurance is a form of conquest. The empire measured victory in territory, in tribute, in the number of tribes that knelt before the emperor's image. The Picts measured victory in something simpler. They measured it in the fact that they were still there, still speaking their language, still painting their bodies, still singing their songs, when the empire that had tried to destroy them was collapsing into dust. There is a lesson in that for every empire that has ever believed itself eternal. The wall did not protect Rome from the Picts. It protected Rome from the truth. Behind stone and mortar, the empire hid from the realization that some people would never accept its dominion, not because they were less civilized, but because they were free in a way that Rome had forgotten how to be. The Picts did not build an empire. They did not want one. They wanted their land, and they kept it. For the historian, the Picts remain an enigma. They left no written records of their own, no chronicles of their victories, no names of their kings that can be confirmed with certainty. Everything we know about them comes from the people who tried and failed to conquer them. Archaeology has uncovered fragments, silver chains, intricate stone carvings, the famous symbol stones whose meanings have never been fully decoded, but the people themselves remain just beyond reach. We can see their outlines. We cannot hear their voices. Perhaps that silence is the most eloquent testimony of all. A people who do not write their own history leave only their actions to speak for them, and the actions of the Picts speak of a refusal so deep, so complete, that no empire could overcome it. They did not need to tell the world who they were. They knew. And that knowledge was enough. When the last Roman soldier sailed from Britannia, the land that had been called Caledonia reverted to something older. The forts crumbled. The roads disappeared under moss and bracken. The wall stood for a time, then fell into ruin. Its stones stolen for farmhouses and churches. Its purpose forgotten by generations who had never seen a legionary. But the people remained. They did not call themselves Picts anymore. That was a Roman name. A label pinned on them by strangers who could not understand what they were seeing. Over the centuries, they would be called other things, absorbed into other kingdoms, transformed by new waves of invasion and migration. The painted warriors of the north would eventually become part of something larger, something that would one day be called Scotland. But the thread was never broken. The will to remain free, the refusal to kneel, the knowledge that some lands cannot be owned. All of this passed from those generations into the bones of the land itself. It is still there. Anyone who walks through the hills of the Scottish Highlands today, past the ruins of Roman forts that never should have been built, past the stones of a wall that was never meant to hold, can feel it. The wind has not stopped carrying that message. The mist has not stopped hiding those who do not wish to be found, and the question that Rome could not answer, what lies beyond the reach of power, is still waiting for anyone bold enough to ask it.